All yours, Christian.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Right. So, first of all, thanks for having me. I've never done this kind of thing before. So, it's quite nerve-wracking for me, actually. So, thanks for having me. And thanks for giving me your time and attention. And I will try my best to give you some food for thought. So, like David said, I'm not an economist. So what I'm about to share with you is the result of being heavily engaged with this topic for about 10 years. I've been reading and asking questions. I've had the good fortune over the years to be able to correspond with and have dialogue with some of the best economics teachers in the world, including the authors of modern monetary theory itself. So I'm just sharing with you what I've learned. So I can point you to my sources. I do a podcast with my good friend, Patricia Pino, and we've been recording interviews with economists and getting them out there in a hopefully engaging format that people can use to help them understand what we consider this really vital thing to grasp for participants in a democracy. So why is understanding modern money so important when it comes to understanding the world and how to change it? And I've got a comedian friend called Glenn Wool. He's a fantastic comedian. He has this great line. He goes, if newspapers were really designed to help you understand the world, the business section would be at the front of the newspaper, and the rest of the newspaper would be called the consequences. So money is one of the most potent forces affecting our lives, but we never really ask ourselves, why is that? And it's probably because we're so busy working to get these pieces of paper with monarchs and old dead people printed on them. We don't really have time to figure out what makes them different from all the other bits of paper in the world. So because it's a bit of a dry topic, I'm going to do a bit of a slideshow. I need to just do the share screen thing. So play that. No, I'm not. I'm going to do that. Where's the right? Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Oh, okay. You can enable the screen sharing.
Sorry, can you not share your screen?
Yeah, it says disabled attendee screen sharing.
1 minute then.
It's good. It's security. You know, I've got all kinds of awful photos on here.
There you go. Try again.
Okay, we'll do. Share screen. Boom. Right. Okay. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Yeah.
No. Have you actually clicked share at the bottom right hand side?
Got it. Thank you.
That's it.
Right. So you're seeing it now. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to nip over to this. Okay. Everybody see that? It's a big tree with money on it.
Yep.
Can everybody see it? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So we start this presentation because it's a bit of a dry topic. I'm going to start this presentation with a picture of my fiance because I like to brag, and so her name's Corrie. And the great thing about Corrie is she has given me permission to show you a picture of her with no clothes on. So everybody's over 18, right? Okay, here we go. Right. So the rare disease fans out there might see that she's got this thing called Sherman's disease, and it means the bones in her spine are growing wedge shaped. They've got bony spurs on. They grind together. She spends every day in chronic pain. It's a progressive disease, which is a funny word for something that gets permanently, increasingly shit. I think it should be called J.K. Rowling, but I'm not a doctor. Anyway, she's had this for most of her adult life, and it was continuously misattributed to other things. But in 2015, her mom scraped together some money for a private assessment, and that's when she found out she had this rare condition. And if maybe it had been caught earlier, the problems she's having now might not be so bad. But anyway, in February this year, on top of the pain, severely reduced mood, she started losing sensation in her arm, dropping things. Her legs keep going out from under her. So we went to the doctor. So this is February 2019. The doctor said she'd arranged a referral. A few weeks later, we got a letter referring her for an appointment in March 2020. And that was initial consultation. And now we're waiting for a scan, which we're told is likely to be in August. So she'll have been waiting a year and 7 months before the next thing happens. And that's a scan, it's not treatment. So she's doing all this waiting in chronic pain. She sleeps maybe maximum 2 hours a night. So it's kind of like living torture. So we know if we had private health insurance, she'd be much further along by now, maybe even surgery. That's the point of private healthcare. It's supposed to be better. Otherwise, there'd be no need for it and they wouldn't be able to sell it. Okay. So in this country, we're not distributing healthcare by need anymore. We're distributing it by income. So if you've got more money, you get a better service. Now, we would not accept this in any other public service. You would not accept it if you called up the fire brigade because your house is burning down and they put you on a waiting list and just let your house burn down while they send a fire engine to somebody who's gone private to get a cat out of a tree. So putting out burning buildings is something that we dispense for free by need rather than income, because property is sacrosanct in our culture and life isn't. So to me, having a national health service means distributing healthcare by need rather than income, and those days are over. Okay, we need to stop talking about saving the NHS and start talking about reinstituting the NHS. So that's what it looks like to me on the micro level. What about the macro level? Okay, everybody remember this when this came out as a study in 2017, and it linked all these deaths to the austerity policies, and that was the death toll back then. Obviously, it's much higher now, as David mentioned in the introduction. Now, people have weird reactions to this study. I share it around on Facebook every now and then, just to remind people, hey, we're killing people. Hello. And I had a friend say to me, like, when you say austerity killed these people, don't you mean they were going to die anyway, but they just died sooner than they would have? And my reaction is, yes, that is what happens when you kill people. They just die sooner than they would have. In fact, what a great defense. Mr. Shipman, I find you guilty on multiple counts of murder. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Yes, Your Honor, they would have died anyway. I just change the timeline a little bit. And so the next thing people go to is, look, nobody voted to kill 120,000 people. We were told that the government would run out of money, so we couldn't afford luxuries like dignity and life. So no, it's not. We've run out of nurses or equipment or buildings to put them in. Those things existed in the real world, but the A&Es were closed, services were cut, workers who wanted their jobs were put out of work. So we hadn't run out of the real things we needed to heal people, or God forbid, build up some spare capacity in the event of, a global pandemic. So we had to let those resources go to waste and let people die because supposedly the government had run out of money. And here's the damning evidence that the government had run out of money. This is a letter from, awful handwriting, by the way. This is a letter from the outgoing Treasury Secretary to the incoming one in 2010. And it says, "Dear Chief Secretary, I'm afraid there is no money." And apparently it's an inside joke. It's a tradition to send jokey notes like this when the staff changes. So this guy tries out this joke in 2010. By 2015, 120,000 people are dead. It's kind of a high stakes comedy, if you take my meaning. So how did we swallow this, right? In order to believe that the government can run out of money, you've got to believe that money is a thing that can be scarce or abundant. Maybe it's something occurring in nature, or we've got no control over it. Maybe it grows on a special tree, okay? How do we come to think like this? And it's because of the stories we rehearse as a culture. So when you ask people what money is and where it comes from, you usually get a jokey reply, or you might get an emotionally charged response based on a lot of folklore. And so just to see where people were at, I went to the fount of all knowledge, Facebook. I asked my Facebook friends where they thought the pounds in their bank accounts originally came from. Okay, this is how I asked the question. Where do you think the pounds in your bank account came from, as in pounds or dollars or whatever the currency is and where you come from? Not as in your employers or your customers, as in where did the pounds come from originally? And here's one of the answers I got. This guy, Debden, towards the end of the circle line. And initially you think he's being funny, but there is actually a factory in Debden, Delarue, and this is where some of our money is constructed in this factory. It's near the end of the Central Line, by the way. And actually, if you zoom in on Google Maps, you can see one of the employees on a smoke break. That's just my little joke there. So a lot of people bypass this question of where the money comes from by going down this route of who manufactures the physical notes and the coins. But saying this factory is where the money comes from doesn't really give us an answer at the level of institutions. It's not like one of the printers one morning wakes up and thinks, hey, I think there should be more pounds in the world. And he goes and he fires up the printing press and he drops sacks of £10 notes from a helicopter until he gets bored of it. Saying this factory is where the money comes from is starting the money story in the middle. That's like saying, now, my day job is I'm a comedian, and that's like saying the tickets to my shows come from the printing firm that printed the tickets. But it's not like Ticketmaster print a load of tickets and they tell me they've printed a load of tickets and then I have to go, oh, right, I better write and put on a show now. The order of events is I decide to put on a show, I issue the tickets, I farm the details out to Ticketmaster. The sequence of the operations is I decide to do something in the real world. I issue tickets as a receipt of the agreement that an audience member and I have come to. So they give me my ticket back. I give them a show. If I think I could sell 100 tickets, I'll print 100 tickets. If I think I could sell 1,000 tickets, I'll print 1,000 tickets. I can issue as many as I want without limit. Okay. So we're back to this. Where do you think money comes from? A few years back, after the financial crisis in 2008, I wanted to dig a bit deeper into this stuff. So I started reading around the topic and interacting with economists. Eventually, me and my friend Patricia started this podcast. It's called the MMT Podcast. And we interview economists and we love it. And this is me with Warren Mosler, who is known as the father of modern monetary theory. And he's worked really hard at coming up with the best ways of framing these complicated concepts with a view to making sure that people understand these things. Now, it's worth noting that Warren, when he came up with the initial insights, was an investment portfolio manager. So what became known as modern monetary theory was originally Mosler economics. So it came from the real world and moved into academia. So as an investment manager, he's watching the central bank operations and government policies, watching them very closely to see what affects what in the real world. He's also thinking in terms of debits and credits. So, if something happens on this side of the ledger, what does that do to the other side of the ledger? And he's got this great story from back in the 1970s when he was at William Blair and Company, which is an investment bank. And I'll just give you the bare bones of it. One of his colleagues calls him on the trading desk and he says to him, hey, the Federal Reserve just made a mistake. They're supposed to send us $30,000, but they accidentally sent us $300 million. And what had actually happened is the person sending the money from the Fed had one of those old manual adding machines with double zeros and triple zeros to make it easier. So when he was typing in the number, he accidentally hit the triple zero a couple of times instead of the single zero, and accidentally gave them $300 million instead of $30,000. So Warren rounds off the story by going, "This is good money. We could have. They caught the mistake. They had to send it back, and there's the whole funny thing around that. But if they hadn't, they could have gone out and spent it. And so the lesson is, so this is Warren's story, and he rounds the story off by going, the lesson is when people ask me, where does the money come from? He goes, it comes from a guy's thumb, right? So is this where money comes from? Okay, well, it kind of is, but we're still not quite starting the money story from the beginning. So we need to know who operates the thumb. So Warren starts writing and thinking about this stuff and interacting with academic economists. And then by the late 90s, Warren has co-written a paper called Soft Currency Economics with Professor L. Randall Wray. And he starts working with Professor Bill Mitchell from Australia, because the money works the same there as it does in all countries with a modern money system, including ours. And this interaction between Warren and these academics is the beginning of this school of thought called modern monetary theory. So the MMT currency description that I'm going to share with you applies to nations with a floating exchange rate, non-convertible fiat currency. I think we all know that we live in a country with a fiat currency. It's not about gold anymore. So floating exchange rate means that it's not pegged to another currency, like the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar. And a non-convertible means that you're not promising to convert a certain amount of your currency to a fixed quantity of a commodity, like say gold, like we used to do under the gold standard. We don't have that constraint anymore, and we haven't for a long time. So now we have fiat currencies. So where does the money come from? So if you live in a country with a modern money system, that is to say with a currency issuing government, like say the UK, the US, Japan, Canada, or Australia, to name a few, but not all, your government spends money into existence using computer keystrokes. It's not controversial. Central bankers say it out loud. The Bank of England put out a study in 2014 called Money Creation in the Modern Economy, and that confirms this is how it works. So the order of operations is the government passes a budget. Once the new spending is approved by Parliament, the government instructs its central bank, the Bank of England, to credit the bank accounts of the recipients of the new spending using computer keystrokes. So new pounds are spent into existence every time the government spends. And this money that the government is spending is not collected from billionaires. It's not borrowed from your adult grandchildren in the future and sent back in time in a DeLorean. No gold coins are hammered into the internet to make those bank balances go up. Okay, so what does that mean for workers and these pieces of paper that we all have to work for? Can we now refuse to work for them now that we've figured out where they come from? No, and that is because of the primary purpose of taxes. And I find this is the most challenging thing for people to accept about modern money. But I'll just say it to you anyway. Right? Your tax payments to central government are not collected and piled up for the government to spend out again. Your tax payments to central government don't go anywhere. They are deleted out of existence as far as you in the private sector are concerned. It's very hard to hear that. They don't go into a vault and await central government spending. Okay, so it's because it's a spreadsheet entry. Because the government doesn't need your money to spend. The government actually needs you to need its money. And that's what taxes are for in the first place, to drive the currency from inception. The government needs to provision itself with roads, bridges, soldiers, doctors, nurses, teachers, people to build the buildings that house all these institutions. So it lays on a tax in a token that it alone is allowed to create. And in the UK, we call these tokens pounds. And by presenting the population with tax bills or tax liabilities payable in pounds, not gold, not seashells, that means individuals now have to do something to get pounds to settle their tax obligations to the state. So now you've got people who are looking for paid work but can't find it. We call that unemployment, by the way. And that's the thing that allows the government to spend their otherwise worthless pieces of paper into existence to hire the people that it caused to be unemployed when it laid on the tax. Now, Warren Mosley, who I've been talking about, uses this great analogy to demonstrate how money comes into being, and I'll do my version of it. So here's the challenge, as Professor Hyman Minsky put it. Anyone can create money. The problem lies in getting it accepted. And Hyman Minsky is kind of one of the forebears of modern monetary theory. L. Randall Wray studied under this professor and wrote the first, L. Randall Wray wrote the first modern monetary theory book called Understanding Modern Money. So the problem lies in getting it accepted. So here's how we do it, okay? So create your own currency, beginner's guide. Step 1, acquire worthless paper. So first of all, you need some worthless pieces of paper. So let's imagine you're a stupid comedian and you ordered up 10,000 tickets for a show about economics, but you didn't sell any, and then coronavirus happened, and now you're saddled with this big pile of worthless cards lying around. You know, I've got hundreds of these. Where are they? There they are. Hundreds of these lying around. I could make more without limit, like I said at the beginning. It'd be great if these were money. but how do I get you to accept these as money? Okay, that's the thing, get people to accept it. So here's how it works. Let's just pretend, for the purposes of this analogy, that we're all sitting in one room together and we're not on the internet. So we're all sitting in one room together, and I take out one of my cards and I say, look, would anybody in this room like to buy one of these pieces of paper off me? Of course not, it's a worthless piece of paper. Okay, would anybody like to clean the floor of this room that we're all in for me? I'll pay one of these per hour. Of course, nobody wants to work for this. Okay, how about if I pay 10 per hour? Of course, nobody wants to work for this piece of paper. It's a completely worthless piece of paper. But now I'm going to add one more thing in our imaginary room that we're all in. There's only one door out of the room. There's a man on the door with a machine gun. It's just an analogy, don't panic. There's a man on the door with a machine gun, and he works for me, and you can't leave the room unless you pay him one of these pieces of paper, and only one of these pieces of paper. You can't fake it or you go to jail. Okay, so everybody now wants to earn one of these pieces of paper, and I can get the floor clean. Okay, the man on the door with the machine gun in this analogy is the tax man. Okay, without him, these are just worthless pieces of paper. But now he's here enforcing the tax that I just put on everybody. All of you need to work for these. So the tax man, as Warren Mosler likes to say, turns litter into money. So as Minsky says, anybody can make their own money. The problem is getting people to accept it. So it works like this. You need worthless paper, then a tax man, then you've got your money. Okay? When you're a government with a fiat currency, taxes are the way you get people to accept your money. And this is a framework for understanding money, and it's called chartalism. And it goes right back to Adam Smith, and it goes even further. In fact, John Maynard Keynes said, I think I've got it here, there we go, that's chartalism. That's the quick definition of it. And here we go. This quote from John Maynard Keynes: for the last 4,000 years, we've had modern money. So, i.e. governments or ancient authorities have been choosing what is and isn't money since the beginning of recorded human history. Apparently, the earliest writings are ledgers, people keeping track of who owes what to who. As Professor L. Randall Wray jokes, writing wasn't invented by poets, it was invented by accountants. So we've got this insight now that the government or its agents are the only issuer of the thing that it demands in payments of taxes. And if you think it through, that means the government necessarily has to spend first before it can collect taxes. Otherwise, how would anybody get the money they need to pay taxes? And so, if you pull a £5 note out of your pocket and ask yourself, where did it come from? If it's not counterfeit, it was issued by the government, and it hasn't yet been used to pay tax, or you wouldn't have it. Okay. All right. So what's all of this got to do with democracy and public policy? So back to my created currency. There we go. I've made it a bit more legitimate there by writing totes legit on it. So imagine I'm the government in the room. I put this man on the door with a machine gun to create money. Why did I do that? Well, it was because I wanted to get the floor clean. So let's make it a happy story, a happy country with a functional democracy. I get to do that because I won an election. I promised to get the floor cleaner than the person I was running against. I won the election. You voted for a clean floor. So you gave me permission to do this. So now I need workers and cleaning products and all the stuff I need to carry out the thing you voted me in to do, just like a real government needs materials and labor to do stuff. So I like to say that we, the people, issue the money through our government to do the things we want it to do. So let's do our accounting, and we'll keep it simple. And imagine the room's got, say, 50 people in it. If I spend 50 and I tax 50, everybody's got a job, nobody's unemployed, nobody's going to jail for non-payment of taxes, and we've got a clean floor. Notice, if I don't spend at least 50, somebody's going to be unemployed. Okay. In a real country, you need more than just the floor cleaning. You need all the other stuff. And we didn't vote for my government to do those things. So the private sector is going to have to do those. So in reality, I'm only going to pay a couple of the people in the room to do the floor. And then the rest of you need to do jobs for them because they're the only source of money for the rest of you if I'm only paying them. So they need to have money left over after paying taxes back to me to pay the rest of you to do the things that they need, like grow food or build houses or whatever. Okay, and they need the tokens because they also have to pay the tax man. So this goes to one of the golden rules of macroeconomics. It's always worth bearing this in mind. Somebody's spending is somebody else's income. Okay, so I'm the government. I spend the money into existence to get the floor cleaned. My spending is my employees' income. They spend some. Their spending is somebody else's income. That income becomes that person's spending until hopefully everybody's got a job and not living or going to jail for not paying tax. So at this point, if I spend 50 and tax 50, there can't be any private sector savings. I'm taking all the money out that I'm putting in. So I need to spend more than I take in tax to leave you guys with the rest, with enough spending money after tax to create these private sector jobs and allow people to have savings. So if I spend 50 and only tax 10 and there's 40 left over, well, that's nice for you guys. Who's got the 40? You guys. Okay, they're out there somewhere being used for transactions. They're circulating from person to person until they're given up to the taxman, and then they're out of circulation. So when I do that, when I spend 50 and when I spend 50 and I tax 10 and there's 40 left over, I'm running a deficit. That's spending more than I take in. I'm running a deficit of 40. Who's got the 40? You guys. Is basic accounting, right? So that goes to this other true thing, that the government deficit is the private sector surplus, okay? That's exactly how it works in the real world. For a second, let's have a look at that. That's what this graph shows. Let's take a minute to look at this. You'll see, like, when the government, no, I can't point to that. Okay, when the government deficit goes up, the private sector savings go up by the exact same amount to the penny, because these are accounting identities. So if you look at the part just after 2008, after the crash, after the great financial crisis, the government is deficit spending like crazy to keep people in the black. I shouldn't say deficit spending. They end up running a deficit to keep the private sector in the black. And they don't do that deliberately. It happens automatically. What happens is people lose their jobs, so they start claiming dole and they stop paying income tax. So payments from the government to people go up, and payments to the government from people go down automatically, and that increases the government deficit automatically. And they call this the automatic stabilizers. And it's supposed to create a soft landing for the economy in a recession. It stops people's incomes and therefore their expenditures falling to zero. So all the money in the private sector, all the money the private sector has left over after the tax, all the money in your current accounts and your savings accounts and in your pockets right now is all a piece of the government's deficit. So hopefully you can see why we'd want the government to run a deficit. It's our money. So where do pounds come from? The government spends them into existence. They don't tax them back out again. They run a deficit, and they can issue as many pounds as they want for whatever they want without operational limit, okay? And they can use that power wisely, or they can use that power really wisely. But it's literally impossible for a government like ours to run out of money. It's just not the appropriate paradigm. So this austerity thing, that's a choice. The fact that people with more money get better healthcare is a choice. Unemployment is a choice, okay? One last thing to do with my currency, okay? Let's take it in the other direction. Let's say I tax 50, but I only spend 40. So I'm taxing more than I spent. So I'm running a surplus, all right? First of all, the tax bill on the whole economy is not going to get paid because there's only 40 cards out there. Somebody's going to jail. Somebody's living in poverty. That's guaranteed unemployment somewhere in the economy. Why would I run a surplus? If I need 50 hours of work to get the floor clean, I should spend 50. If I need 40 hours, I should spend 40. There's no need for me to tax 50. I don't need an extra 10 of these cards. I have infinite cards. So in my position, only an idiot or a sadist would run a surplus. And this is where we are at the moment. So I'm just going to come out of the slideshow and talk the rest of this stuff through. I'm going to turn off the screen sharing. How do I do that? Okay. Got a situation where the cursor has disappeared. Okay. Have I stopped it? No. I have stopped it. Is everybody there? All right. Give me a sec. Is everybody still there? Can you see me? Okay. I'm sorry about my hair, by the way. I look like one of the lesser Doctor Who's. Right. Let me get back to this. Okay. So, where was I with my notes? Here we go. So, I hope you got something from that. The idea is that the government creates money. All right. How does this change things for progressive activists? Don't we still have the same struggle? We have a massively uneven society. Don't we need to transfer money from people who have so much of it that it's toxic to democracy and social cohesion, and put it in the hands of people who have very little of it? Well, now we're getting to the secondary function of taxes, and that's to limit the spending power of the private sector. And it makes a lot of sense to target and severely limit the spending power of the wealthiest individuals for social equity purposes. But also, with MMT, what we should realize is that because the government creates money when it spends, we're not fighting for a finite pool of money in order to change the situation of people struggling to survive. So to put it in the framework that we all grew up with, and I'm from Nottingham, so I'm very sensitive to this, the currency issuing government can take from the rich and give to the poor, but it doesn't need to take from the rich to give to the poor, okay? So the source and the solution of the challenge for activists, as I see it, lies at the beginning of that money story that I just told you, which is when the government lays on its tax in the first instance, it makes everybody unemployed by definition, i.e. everybody is looking for work that pays in pounds and they can't find it. And then the government spends its money into existence to hopefully hire all the people that it unemployed. Therefore, any residual unemployment left over exists because the government's made a mistake. It either didn't spend enough money to employ everybody unemployed, or when it taxed, it took too much money out of the system to let the spending power of the private sector increase to a level that creates the number of jobs that we need to give paid work to everybody that wants it. So to fix that mistake, the government can either spend more or tax less, or both. But even with the political will to make full employment a priority, which it used to be, it's impossible to target a precise number of pounds that should exist in the economy to make sure that everybody has a job, because that number is a moving target. So because governments that have their own currency have this infinite checkbook, they're presented seemingly with two suboptimal choices. Either they can put too much spending power into the economy and risk inflation, which is costly at the ballot box, or they can leave too little spending power in the economy and force a certain percentage of people to try and survive barely subsistence wages, involuntary unemployment, which it would seem in the UK, that's not costly at the ballot box. So they tend to go for that second choice. Now, MMT has this Goldilocks solution to get the level of spending in the economy just right. And it goes like this. It is to guarantee a job to anyone who is willing and able to work at a fixed socially inclusive wage, and other conditions like free childcare or on-the-job training where necessary, whatever we think should be the minimum standard of living for a worker. And this stabilizes the currency by anchoring its value to the economy's most crucial input, which is human time and labor. But more importantly, it puts a floor under the minimum standard of living for everybody. And it's very important to note, because I've said job guarantee, it's very important to note this is not a scheme that's designed to make people who can't or shouldn't work because of, say, disability, have to go out and work for financial assistance. Those kind of benefits would still be there under this scheme. And of course, an MMT understanding of where money comes from, those benefits could and should be paid at a much higher level than they are now. So the MMT job guarantee is a guaranteed offer of work. It's not a demand to work. It's voluntary on the part of the worker. It's an extra option designed to eliminate involuntary unemployment. And the argument that I favor that cuts through many of the objections to a job guarantee comes from an economist called Ellis Winningham. And it's to recognize that we already have a government job guarantee in place. As it stands in this country, if you can't find a job in the public or private sector, the government will guarantee you a job where you can organize your own workload, but the job description is to not die. And it pays below subsistence wages. So it's good for people who like a challenge. And the job title is inflation fighter. And it's a crucial job if you believe, like Norman Lamont, that unemployment is a price worth paying to control inflation. In the UK, this job is also known as being on universal credit. Okay? There's a rigorous and some would say humiliating interview process to go through. And some people die waiting to hear whether or not they've got the job. But that's the job you're entitled to at any given time here in the UK. The MMT job guarantee is designed to compete with this job. It's designed to give workers the power to turn down this job in favor of one that pays a socially inclusive wage, doing things that are of benefit to the community, but not necessarily profitable for the private sector to instigate. Now, some people argue that in an age of robots and automation, in an age of robots and automation, a job guarantee is an old-fashioned solution to a modern problem, but it's not a modern problem. This thing called technological, what do they call it? Technological unemployment. It's not a modern problem. It's a very old story. It's called increased productivity, which has been with us since at least the advent of the windmill, the water wheel. It's not a problem in and of itself. It's the public policy response to it that turns it into a problem that typically gets shouldered by the most insecure workers in an economy. So at the moment, workers displaced by increased productivity have no choice but to shift into a buffer stock of unemployed humans and have a miserable life fighting inflation while the captains of industry figure out which new poorly paid jobs they'd like to slot people into when they're good and ready to start hiring again. So we're not suggesting to replace the toil that human ingenuity and technology has done away with the exact same toil. What MMT recognizes is that the government, like it or not, because of the money system, the government sets the minimum standard of living for all the people in the country. So what an advanced society without a job guarantee is saying is that if you can't find a job in the public or private sector, you are entitled to a below subsistence standard of living, and private sector employers, when they're ready to hire, only have to pay a little better than that to get a worker. What a society that implements the job guarantee will be saying is that if you are willing and able to work, say, a 40-hour week, this is the type of life we think a person should be entitled to. So a socially inclusive wage, on-the-job training, paid leave, paid maternity leave, paid sick leave, etc. If you think that a 40-hour week should be a thing of the past, we should be working less, make the job guarantee a 30-hour week for the same paying conditions. And then the private sector will have to fall in line with that. It won't be able to undersell you. And I don't know how we're doing for time. I've got another 5-10 minutes if you want, or I can wrap it up in 5.
5 minutes, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just a riff on universal basic income, because that's quite sexy at the moment. I try not to get in the way of people who are advocating UBI, because I think we all want the same thing, which is this guaranteed floor put under our minimum standard of living. But that said, I'm just going to say a couple of negative things about UBI as I see it in the spirit of constructive criticism. So before I say this, I think we can all agree, I hope we can all agree, that basic income paid to people right now during the coronavirus pandemic to keep them clothed and fed and housed because they can't go to work without endangering lives. I think we can agree that kind of assistance is necessary, it's what we should be doing, but it's time limited to whenever the crisis has passed. Therefore, it's conditional, and that's not universal basic income, that's basic income. So that's not what I'm criticizing here. So the first problem with UBI is that it's universal, okay? So hopefully we can agree that monetary economies have at least two types of people in them. People who, in order to survive, need more money than they have the opportunity to earn, and will spend extra money if they can earn it or if it's given to them. And then we've got this other group of people that don't need extra money and very likely won't spend it if it's given to them. And we know this second group of people exist because not only do they have large amounts of savings they're not spending and assets they don't need to sell, but at the very high end, they're constantly looking for places to put their money to be tax efficient. So those people have spent all the money they're going to spend already. They're just piling it up. So it seems to me giving that group of people more money very likely won't result in any more spending, which won't result in any more income for anybody else, and therefore no economic growth that that first group of people will be able to benefit from. So if we consider these two groups of people over a 10-year timeline, if you give a modest UBI of say £1,000 a month to these two groups of people for 10 years, at the end of that 10-year period, the person that needed it to survive will have spent it, they will have built no wealth. At the other end of the scale, the high income earner with savings and assets will have seen their personal wealth go up by £120,000. Over a 20-year timeline, that's the best part of £250,000. That's like a free house or two houses, depending on where you live, right? Of course, it won't end there because UBI is a permanent, unconditional program. So hopefully you see that one valid criticism of UBI is that it will deepen wealth inequality. I know that some people then like to defend UBI by talking about how their version of it comes with a tax plan to claw back the money from people who are already wealthy. But at that point, we're then talking about a de facto basic income and not a universal basic income. And as I said earlier, targeted basic income is something that me and all the MMT advocates that I interact with support. But like I say, we think it should be targeted rather than universal. The second criticism of UBI is that it doesn't end involuntary unemployment. And it's valid to say that it's not designed to do that. And it leads me to think, given that it deepens wealth inequality, it won't guarantee a minimum standard of living in a way that it can't be provided by basic income, what is it for? So I hope that helps people understand why MMT advocates are apprehensive about UBI as distinct from basic income. So I always say when you consider the climate crisis and the health crisis, the economic crisis, you've got to conclude, even though we've got iPhones and we've got Space Force, there's still loads of things to do here on Earth. Another one of my favorite economists, Professor John T. Harvey, he says, if you've got a social problem, you've got a job that needs doing. And so the job guarantee is there to help distribute that work equitably. So my conclusion here is, excuse me, I think MMT is designed to change public policy discourse in two ways. One is to have everybody understand what money is, where it comes from, and why we have it. And the second is to say, given this is the what and the where and the why of a money system, here's the rational way to manage that system. So what is money? It's a tax credit. A £5 note guarantees you nothing more or less than £5 off your tax bill. But also, because it's a tax credit and everybody needs taxes, everybody needs to pay taxes sooner or later, it can be swapped for anything else you can put a price on in our economy. And that's how pounds are our national currency rather than gold or Bitcoin or seashells. Where does money come from? It's issued, just like any other token, by an issuer. I issue my show tickets, an insurance company issues insurance policies, the UK central government issues pounds, and the issuer cannot run out of the thing it issues by definition. Why do we have a money system? Because the government needs to provision itself. So it runs a monetary system where it creates people needing to find paid work, imposing a tax on everybody, payable in a thing that it alone is allowed to issue, precisely so it can spend currency into existence to hire people and buy things in order to provision itself. You don't get public goods and services like the NHS without a modern money system. So the order of operations is this. The desire to provision for a public purpose comes first. The tax bill comes second. People looking for paid work to pay the tax bill, otherwise known as unemployment, comes third. Spending pounds into existence to hire the unemployed comes fourth. Taxes being returned back to government comes fifth. Everybody thinks that's where the money story starts, but it comes much later. So taxes returned back to government comes fifth. Residual unemployment, because the government hasn't hired everybody that it unemployed, comes sixth. And it's this residual unemployment that is the government's responsibility, whether it knows it or not. So given that's what money is and where it comes from, and the reason why we have a money system, what's the rational way to run it? So just before the 2019 general election, I was interacting with people who probably thought of themselves as progressive, who were saying things like, I like the Labour manifesto, but they keep promising all this free stuff and I just don't believe they can deliver it. So that's where we are in this country right now. We're not ready for free broadband. It's too radical. So I personally just love it for us to get some self-esteem, and MMT is here to help with that. So the way MMT should change the discourse is that when we're debating as an electorate whether or not a government can afford to spend to stop another 120,000 people dying, or pay people to stay at home to prevent the spread of COVID, and you get politicians on both sides saying, look, we'd love to spend on X, Y, and Z, but we can't afford to do it because we run out of money. Those politicians should be getting laughed at and voted out of office, to the point that they know they have to stop using this wholly inapplicable household analogy when it comes to government spending. So if we get politicians to the point where they're saying, look, we'd love to spend on X, Y, and Z, but we can't because it will cause inflation, that's where we want the debate to be, because it's honest. And that's when we get to deliver our good news, which is our policy prescription for putting a floor under and raising our minimum standard of living is also the primary tool for controlling inflation, which is this job guarantee scheme. So we no longer have to keep people deliberately unemployed and having a precarious life to fight inflation. The job of inflation fighter can be a dignified one, paid at a socially inclusive wage. And this would be like a true rising tide to lift all boats. And I think politicians have to work with the framework that the general public is working with. So if it suddenly became conventional wisdom for everybody that everybody thought the world was flat, every politician, whether they believed it or not, would have to start talking like the world was flat, because they're mediocre at best and venal at worst. Sorry for a politician. That's not my words, that's Karl Popper. Anyway, as voters, we've just spent the last 10 years proving to politicians that they don't need to be scared of losing their jobs for killing tens of thousands of people, but in fact, they need to be scared of promising to give us free broadband and a fully funded NHS. So I think our mission should be to reverse that and make politicians scared again, but for the right reasons. So that's the end of my little talk there, and I hope you got something out of it. Thanks.
Christian, that was absolutely wonderful. We're going to give you a virtual clap. Well, I am. I don't know if anybody else is going to.
Thanks for having me.
Christian, that was fantastic.